Hi, welcome to my channel. Today's topic is why I disagree with Crosstalk Peter Lavelle and Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson and Aaron Good as guests. And the episode was broadcast on the 28th of October. And I will leave a link in the description, which you can watch yourself. Now, when Peter actually starts the video or the crosstalk, he says that they're going to discuss three basic questions. One was, how is the conflict in Ukraine likely to end? The second question is, why does the West refuse to negotiate? And the third one is, how will the international order likely change as a result of the Ukrainian conflict? Now, I'm not going to discuss what the various guests have said. I will just react to the questions and present my own narrative or my own view about the matter. So let's start with how would the conflict in Ukraine end? Well, one has to stand a little bit back and then ask yourself, in all conflicts where the Americans have taken part, they have usually either invaded them directly, like in Afghanistan and Iraq, or they have used proxy forces, like in Libya and Syria. And it seems to me that this is using proxy forces is the new strategy of America using. And we should all be aware at this stage that the Americans instigated the 2014 coup in Ukraine and overthrew an elected president. And for the next 8 years, they trained the Ukrainian army to NATO standards and basically prepared them for a battle and a conflict. Now, looking back at the history, I believe that the Ukrainians are the best trained and best equipped proxy force ever used by NATO or by the US. I just would like to mention that NATO is the US and the United States of America. NATO is not the other countries. They are just part of the NATO grouping, but America controls and finances and manages NATO and decides what NATO is going to do. And if the other countries don't agree with that, then they go in any case their own way, similar to what they have done in Iraq. So don't be confused by the matter. NATO is the USA. So one of the reasons, which I have stated before, is that the Vietnam War has shown Americans or what not to do. And what not to do is to bring back body bags home and to fight a battle that destroys a hell of a lot of civilian structures and then allow the media to film it and to send it out in the world. I believe those are the biggest points that the Americans took away from Vietnam. And if you look at the war in Iraq, the first one and the second one, you will find that the media was always highly controlled and limited in their scope of what they could publish, what they could see. And basically they were fed the narrative, and the journalists most of the time just repeated the narrative without questioning. So that's why I said Libya, Syria, and now Ukraine are the new ways of the Americans to promote their hegemony, if that's a correct way of saying. Now, one of the commentators, actually, Aaron Good, said that he quoted Kissinger, if Kissinger was a person that said it, that said, it is dangerous to be America's enemy, but it's deadly to be America's friend. And I believe the same situation holds for Ukraine. America, NATO, will use Ukraine until it has gotten everything out of Ukraine that it could. Doesn't matter whether Ukraine loses or wins. We know they're going to lose because it's David versus Goliath, and this time David doesn't have the magic stone. So what will happen in Ukraine? Well, Russia started off initially to just protect the two provinces of Donetsk and Lugansk. And then there was no peace agreement when there was supposed to be a peace agreement in Turkey. And then Russia also took Kherson area, province, Oblast, and the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And again, it's saying, Putin is saying that he's ready to negotiate. But we all know that Zelensky, NATO, US are not prepared to negotiate. So Russia will have to continue with its military operation. It has in any case changed now from a special military operation to, in my opinion, a limited war in Ukraine by the Russians. And that they are preparing for the next phase, which is effectively the third phase. And they're going to conquer or drive back the Ukrainian army further and thereby incorporate more oblasts into the Russian Federation. I believe the first targets would be the Mykolaiv Oblast and then the Odessa Oblast. And basically then Ukraine becomes landlocked. And then I believe Russia will make another attempt to negotiate or offer negotiations, which will again be rejected. And then it will conquer the oblast north of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia up to Kharkiv, and probably then go slowly west. And well, it looks like one has to always remember two things. Firstly, Zelensky is a puppet. He is not a strong leader, he's an actor, and all the speeches he gives are choreographed and written by somebody else, probably the Americans, which some punters try to put forward. So that's the one thing. And the second thing is that the Nazi elements in the Ukrainian government are well entrenched. They do have a lot of power, even if they only represent a small portion of the population. They do have all the weapons, and they have all the aggression, and they have all the nationalistic feeling, and they have all the hate for the Russians. And it's easy to manipulate them. And, well, until those sections has not been destroyed, there will be no negotiations possible. And I believe at the end of the day, there has to be a regime change by the destruction of the right sector and the Nazis and the whole cabal, nationalists, if you would like to call them, and Zelensky. You have to get rid of them. Zelensky will probably flee. And then Russia will institute a new government, either by themselves or either by selection of the new government of Ukraine by sane people that do understand that Ukraine has lost the war. And the best option before total annihilation would be to ask for peace and then a settlement agreement. Now the question is raised, will NATO, America, allow that? And my answer is definitely yes. There is no way that NATO will get involved into Ukraine. It will supply the weapons as far as it could. It will not supply their own stockpiles in order to weaken themselves. They will pump in some money because it is a form of money laundering for the industrial complex and the politicians in America. And the most important thing is that they would like to destroy or weaken Russia up to a certain level as much as possible. They are using Ukraine deliberately as a proxy force, and they have no feeling whatsoever whether Ukrainians die or not, and whether Ukraine is destroyed, as long as they get maximum benefit out of the conflict. And once they have squeezed the last drop of blood out of Ukraine, they will retreat, and Ukraine will be left on its own. Well, the commentators do say that that would be a defeat to NATO. And I say no, it's not a defeat of NATO. NATO didn't fight the war against the Russians. They supported another country to do their fighting for them. They provided them with money and armament, but that's it. You cannot say that NATO has been defeated when Ukraine finally falls, because they haven't been really involved. It's a legal base, or it's a factual base. You can't argue with 1 + 1 is 2. It's not like wishful thinking. It looks like it's 3. No, it's 1 + 1 is 2. NATO is not fighting the Russians, and therefore they cannot lose. And what will NATO then do? They will start another conflict somewhere else. Currently it looks like Taiwan, but don't hold your horses for that. Maybe they start something in Azerbaijan, Armenia, or they start some other place. Who knows? They always have some kind of clandestine operation, and then the conflict will move there, and the American industrial complex will keep on making money, and America will keep on with its hegemony. And, well, the world go on. Yes, there is the economic impact. That, unfortunately, will put a spanner in the works and will hamper the future expansions of America and what they will be able to do after the Ukrainian conflict. But that is something totally different. And unfortunately, it is part of the process of being dismantled and the establishment of a multipolar world. So that's basically how I see the Ukrainian-Russian military conflict coming to an end. It will probably take not a couple of months, maybe end of next year. Will Russia be weakened? No, because they are actively busy with their own programs of establishing a multipolar world. Most of the Russian oil and gas is still being bought by the rest of the world. It is even bought by America and Europe until the final date of the sanctions being implemented, like the oil shipment by sea is going to be happening by the end of December. So until now, record sales are happening. What will happen in January? Well, the turnover of the Russian souls will slump, because that's when the sanctions come into effect. Unfortunately, the current economic situation in Europe and America didn't start with the Ukrainian war. It started off a long time ago. It became transparent in money printing, and finally it has catch up with them after 2008, and now they are reaping the fruits, which are going to be very bitter. The Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian-Russian war, has only made the situation a lot worse and accelerated the process. And I don't think that West will be able to continue and do business as before. So things are going to change. In any case, so the second question comes on, why does the West not negotiate? Well, why do they need to go negotiate? all this rigmarole, just remember, one has to think about and listen. You get so many contradictive statements made by the West. Then this guy says this, then this guy says that. You can't believe anything that is basically said. But that's not a problem. If you assume that everybody is lying, it doesn't matter what they say. So, again, you have the right sector in Ukraine. Zelensky cannot negotiate until the right sector or movement or whatever you want to nationalists have been removed from their position of power, and therefore he cannot negotiate. The only way that he can maybe negotiate this is when they either, then they're going to kill him in any case. So he needs a good excuse, and if he had good excuses, tell his colleagues that the Americans don't, or the NATO doesn't want to provide any weapons anymore, and that's it, end of story. No more money, no more weapons. What is to do? Can't do anything. Well, only thing left is negotiation and peace. And what happens then? Well, that's a big question. But we all know that Zelensky was prepared to make a deal in March in Turkey, which was then the next day sabotaged by Boris Johnson, who went and talked to him and said, listen here, buddy, I don't think you should actually accept these terms, because you're going to lose a lot of support, and we can't help you, and this is a bad deal, and you either you've got to stop these negotiations. We will help you. We will supply you weapons, and we can fight and win the Russians, drive them out. I think that's the type of promises that Boris Johnson made on behalf of Britain and the US. And actually, Zelensky, who doesn't know the history of the American, how the Americans use their friends and their proxies, probably said yes. And that's why he's making demands from the West for support, and not asking them nicely and friendly and trying to promote the matter. His plight. Again, we all know that there is a right sector in Ukraine, and the pro-Russian punters have always shown or pointed out this fact to who anybody wants to listen. It is being suppressed by the Western narrative, but the Western leaders do know about the right sector. And I'm sure they don't agree with the right sector. But if they are a proxy force, you don't really care about whether you support them or not, unless they are useful. So that's another reason why you can see that in spite of all the Nazi emblems and the Nazi connotation of the nationalists in Ukraine, the West is still supporting them in violation of their own principles. And that should tell you that they are using these guys no matter what. Similar to America that used ISIS and Al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda, those type of terrorist organizations. They use them because they're useful. Well, one always asks yourself, what is the proxy forces getting out of it? Well, they have an ideology and they want to fight that. And as long as somebody helps them, then they find they think they can achieve it. So they think they get a benefit, but no, they are not getting a benefit. They are actually being used up to a point where they are not very useful anymore, and then they are discarded like a empty bag, or how you call it. So there will be no negotiations, and there's a reason for that. It's because NATO, America, will try to get as much benefit out of this conflict as possible, to the proverbial last drop of blood, Ukrainian blood, which is not real. It's like it's a saying. There will always be blood and soldiers still left. So that's not what I mean, but getting maximum benefit out of the whole situation. And I don't think that the Western NATO will allow Zelensky to make in any case any agreement or any peace settlement. You can also see, another point that Peter actually then at the end of the show talks about was that letter from the 30 Democrats that sort of stated very weak, made a very weak request to Biden that they should start or include negotiations, peace settlement and peace negotiations, but then they were so bombarded with hate and criticism that I think the same day they retracted their letter. And again, why did they do it? They got so much pressure that because they went against the general narrative, the general propaganda of the Western leaders or the Western governments, especially American governments, that they were forced to retract that. And then the third question actually asked by, well, in any case, the 30 Democrats, the whole process is, for me, actually a non-event. Doesn't really matter. It just shows you the strength of the cancel culture and the propaganda and how strong the narrative is being controlled and maintained. That should tell you a lot. In any case, then we come to the third question that Peter asked, and that is, how will the international order likely change? Well, we all know Vladimir Putin is hell-bent on creating a multipolar world. Xi Jinping is incredible supportive of this action. They have talked to India and Pakistan, and you can see the slow, defection of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and other nations start to join them, like Argentina, Brasilia, African leaders. So you can see that the process has started, and unfortunately, again, it's a gone conclusion that there will be a multipolar world being established after the Ukrainian war. It will still take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. There are still some vested interest. There is still a lot of dollars being held as reserves in all the countries. The dollar is still being used in international trade, although it will be slowly replaced by the new system. But it's fairly complicated, and it's probably going to take 3, 4, 5 years. It's not going to happen immediately. However, the financial problems in Europe and America will increase, and because it is being accelerated by the Russian conflict, it is being accelerated by the establishment of the multipolar world. The world will not support the American economy and subsidize the dollar and subsidize the living standards of America. Neither will it do it to euro. The euro has already gone below parity with the dollar, and so the British pound is also very near to it. Unfortunately, in my opinion, Britain is in any case a poodle of America and has not much say about that, and it will just become a non-identity, non-event. It will disappear in the mist. In any case, but that will take some time still. And in the day, America will start to realize that they have to fend for themselves, and I believe the living standards in America will drop significantly, on par with some normal countries like the rest of the world has been experiencing for the last 40 years or so, since they have been exploited by America and the West. And all so-called financially colonization of the world will slowly be dismantled, and the world become separated himself from this idea of being colonized financially, and the West will have to fend for themselves. Again, it's going to take some time. Maybe it just goes like an avalanche and falls, and then it will be quick. But as far as I understand, world events don't always happen in like an avalanche. There will be a stock fall. Maybe that will be the trigger. Maybe that will lead to depression. But unfortunately, it will. Such a thing will affect the whole world because all the economies are integrated. So unless we have some period of 5 years where Russia and China and India and so on can stabilize, create the multipolar world and stabilize it and make it financially stable, then they can minimize the effect of the fall of Europe and America. And then the impact will not be that significant. They would be able to absorb it. But if the new multipolar world doesn't have the time of that, then unfortunately that will create some hardship for some countries, and the process or the establishment or the stabilization of the new world order will take a little bit longer. Well, those are my views on how I see it. For me, these commentators are still sticking to the old narrative. It's for you to decide what is more credible, what is more believable. I know I don't profess to be correct, but if you like what you heard, it's still food for thought. So I'll end it today. Please subscribe to the channel, link it, share it with your buddies. Let's increase the subscriber list so that we can do more on YouTube. And then press the like or dislike button. Leave a comment, whatever you feel like it. So until next time, cheers.